Hello and welcome to Caught in the Middle. I am Alicia Essig, your host. This is our very first episode, and I am so excited to bring a longtime friend. Oh, I'm going to get teary-eyed. Eric Rittmeyer, who is currently the Director of Business Development at LifeMed Institute, but he's also known as the Menopause Marine. And you might be like, what? That's kind of a weird combination. And to be honest with you, because I've known Eric for so long, since 1994, I think, when he came out with this book, I called him up and I was like, what you doing? Do you remember when I called you? I was like, what's going on? I don't understand. So Eric, tell us a little bit how you got into this.
Yeah, this is awesome, Alicia. Thank you. And to be the first one on your podcast
You're
too,
the
love
first
it.
one. I
It's
love it.
awesome. Thank you. Congratulations. It's a big
Thank you.
deal to talk about something and actually launch it. So congratulations on that.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I mean, my life took lots of spins to keep it very high level. Former U.S. Marine, got into the mortgage business right out of the Marine Corps. Loved the mortgage business. Spent 20 plus years there. Got into speaking on mental toughness and emotional intelligence, which I still do some of that. I call it psychological performance training, critical thinking, objective reality, systematic desensitization, graduate exposure therapy. And then it morphed into taking on the role of business development here at LifeMed. It's about 4 years ago, I guess. And I just developed a very deep obsession with women's health, just trying to understand why menopause is such a huge issue and how there are no resources or very limited resources for women. And we have a topic that something that every single woman goes through. Menopause is the only universal female medical experience. So for me to witness this, to be a non-medical person, which I should start off with saying,
That's
please don't
right.
take anything I'm going to say today's medical advice, not qualified to give it. But as a non-medical person, I just saw this very ginormous problem and a very big disruptor to women's lives. And on the other side, I saw a fairly easy solution being hormone replacement therapies, which we're going to talk about. So there was this very large gap between the two, and I developed the obsession with it. I was in the process of writing my second book on emotional intelligence. I shelved that. Took about 3 years, and all the literature, all the research, all the data, all the studies, everything I could possibly find about women's health, and spent almost a year writing the book, The Menopausal Marine. It's a play on words, obviously, to get that exact reaction I got from you, but it's just about educating women on getting answers to questions that you deserve that no one's able to give you. So that's kind of how I got here, from Marine Corps to mortgage to mental toughness to menopause. I mean, it seems like a normal progression to me. I don't know.
You like M's, huh?
I do, right? I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that. Very cool. I got to use that. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's a far cry from dancing at 723, right? Like down in good old Fells Point. We're both from Baltimore, for those of you who are listening. And we met back in the 90s through a mutual friend, and we'd hang out, and if you thought about then what we're talking about today, I think that we would have been like, there is no way on earth that we're going to have this conversation. But, the goal of this podcast, as many of you may have already understood, is to have the conversations that people aren't having, the conversations that when you lay in bed and you wonder what's going on, or you go, why is my ear like insatiably itching? That's a menopause. That's an estrogen drop symptom. You knew that, right? Like ear itching. It's
Hot flashes, night sweats, brain fog, insomnia, hair thinning, weight gain, sexual vitality, vaginal atrophy, vaginal dryness, urinary tract infections, heart palpitations, skin irritations, emotional disturbances to the mid region, itchy ear, frozen shoulder. Yes, I'm familiar with that symptom.
all the
Actually,
things. But the itchy ear thing, I remember I bought a Jeep in 2020, and I was like driving down the road and my ear was itching. And I was like, why is my ear itching? Like I wanted to gouge it out. And like there's enough out there in the world where it's like the hot flashes, like everybody wants to make fun of you that you're having hot flashes. Or I saw a video where this poor woman must have been sitting at like a football game. And
yeah,
have you seen it? Where
with
literally
the
the
steam coming
steam's
off. Yeah,
coming off of her
yeah,
head.
yeah.
And you're just like that stuff is normal, but like ear itching and some of the other things that, we all do go through, like you called it universal, universal, what did you call it? Universal,
It's really the only universal female medical experience.
only universal female medical experience. And I think that we as women bond over it. And the fact that you're a man and you are so into that, just again, like, thank you so much. So so you wrote this book, you dove into it, you've told us why. So why is this so taboo? Why are we not talking about it?
We're going back to a study, Alicia, that's 20 plus years old now. That fortunately there's starting to be some new eyes that are looking at it to make some
Yes.
major changes. It's called the Women's Health Initiative. It was back in 2002. To date, still the largest randomized controlled trial specifically for women's health. It was a $675 million study conducted by the National Institute of Health. And the takeaway from the study was if you're a woman taking HRT, you increase your risk of breast cancer by 25%. Overnight, understandably, HRT prescriptions plummet. They drop off by like 80%. And we're talking about therapies that used to be very commonplace in the 80s and 90s. If you're a woman going through menopause, really irrespective of overall health, you just start taking hormone replacement therapies. Overnight, HRT prescriptions plummet. Then headlines go out HRT causes breast cancer. We now know decades later the increased risk of breast cancer was very misrepresented. It's about a 0.10% increased risk in breast cancer. That's for women who have an intact uterus who are taking what's called conjugated equine estrogen and medroxyprogesterone acetate. These are
That was some
synthetic
big words.
forms.
Slow down. Say them again, but a little.
Let's keep it simple. It was for the women in the study who were taking synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone.
Thank you.
So for the women in that study who had an intact uterus who were taking both of those things, very, very minor increased risk in breast cancer. For women who had hysterectomies who did not have an intact uterus, they're actually able to take estrogen alone. There was a decreased risk in breast cancer in that group. So when you look at those very minor increased risks to breast cancer, there are significant decreased risks to bone disease, brain disease, most importantly, heart disease. The number one leading cause of death for women is cardiovascular disease. So we now know decades later that information was incorrectly extrapolated from that study. The FDA has made announcements now after hosting a panel, 12
Mm-hmm.
doctors. It's on YouTube. You've
I
probably seen
saw it.
that. Lots,
Yeah.
lots of ladies have seen it. So they're now going to be removing the warning labels from lots of hormone
Yes.
replacement therapies,
That's
which is
been
groundbreaking.
big headlines in the last couple of weeks, which I'm just like, well, thank God, because with all of the changes, I'm like, okay, please, now that I feel like I've gotten myself to a place where I'm good and I'm taking HRT and I'm like, okay, please, dear God, don't take it away from me. Like, please, dear God, don't take it away from me. Why do you think, like, culturally speaking, why do you think, like, there was that piece where it was like, no, this is bad for you and it can cause breast cancer, but aside from that, why do you think nobody talks about it? Do you think there's in some of my circles, let me explain why. In some of the circles when I talk to other women one to one about what we're experiencing, many of us wonder if our mothers just didn't experience it as intensely as we are now. Or is it just that, we're Gen X and so we're like, we're going to talk about this and we're not putting up with it like Gen X never really has put up with much of a lot? Or is it worse for us? Like, has there been some reason that it's actually worse for us than it was for our preceding generations?
I think it's a combination of all those. And I think if you look at prior generations, like our parents and our grandparents, especially, if my grandparents were alive to hear about the things that we talk about very freely right now, they would roll over. They'd be like, you've got to be kidding me. So I feel like there's a component to where, it used to be what happened within your house stayed within your house. You didn't talk about it. You didn't express any of those feelings, whether it be marital issues, health issues. As it relates to menopause, it was just a total lack of discussion. And a lot of women I work with in their mid 40s, early 50s, the vast majority of women will say to me, Eric, I never talked to my mom about this, like was not a discussion that came up. Or if I talk to ladies who have had discussions, it's almost always didn't talk to my mom about it, but she told me it sucked and she told me it was horrible and she told me good luck. So these are all things that you talk about awareness. I think what's happened now, thanks to Gen X, thanks to the Beastie Boys, you got to fight for your right to party, right? Like we're going to fight for this stuff. Thanks to that. Also, thanks to social media, which does give us the ability to send out this message, to have celebrities out there talking about it. Again, you go back to something that for as long as women have been alive, they have gone through menopause. And to not discuss this, to not properly train people is what's very baffling to me. So I think it's a combination of all these things. Obviously, we know more now about diet and exercise that we ever have in the past.
Totally.
Women are living significantly longer, mainly thanks to the advent of antibiotics, right? This is in our last 100 or so years, we've been able to pretty much double lifespan. As women, it was extremely risky for you to give childbirth, right? That was a very deadly thing for baby and for mom. So it's a combination of all these things. I don't think there's any one thing that would specifically jump out, but the good thing about where we are now is we do have a generation that is not going to take no for an answer, and we have the ability to convey the message via social media, and we also have the therapies now available and the studies that are available. So the combination of all of that, I think, makes this a topic that is going to continue to get significant amounts of well-deserved attention, and it's going to have to be fact-based information. But it does all start with talking, discussing, educating our daughters, talking to our girlfriends and guy friends. Guys have to be educated on this as well.
Well, don't worry, we're getting to that. There's a reason you're here, honey. Um,
Right.
no, it's interesting because I think personally started perimenopause, which was discussed in another episode, but perimenopause, honestly, in my late 30s. And I have been going to a functional medicine. She's technically a chiropractor, but she does so much more than just that. And I started saying, something's off, something's wrong, something's not right. And you rattled that huge list of symptoms, and I want to dive into some of them. And the first symptom that I feel like I really had was definitely wonky periods. And we're talking like inconsistent timing. You're supposed to bleed every 28 days. I was having some like 2 weeks, 6 weeks, another 2 weeks. And the blood itself, and this is where, like, the cotton middle theme is we talk even the gross stuff, but the blood itself was not the same. It was different. It was thicker. It was this. It was, I mean, there were times when the period cramps would take my breath away. I can remember being on vacation in Hawaii, and I got my period, and I was sitting at lunch, seaside. It's like gorgeous. And I went, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I was like, I mean, it felt like labor pains. Like it was just so incredible. And of course, I went to my gynecologist and I was like, "Hey, something's wrong." And they're like, "Oh, you're only 39. You're only 40. It's You're too young." And they just brushed me off. And then I'd go back and I'd say, "God, I'm gaining weight, but yet nothing's changing. I mean, I don't understand. Like I'm not changing my diet. I'm not changing anything. I have horrific headaches, and so, like, as time went on, the symptom after symptom, and I think one of the ones that, like, really made me dive into it, in addition to what you had said, with social media, there's been many creators that have put content out that I have learned from, which thank God for them. I am so grateful for them. But, like, I'd gotten to the point where I was very, very dry, like crazy dry, and sex was very painful. And I went to the doctor and I was like, I think something's happened to the inside of my vagina. Like, what's going on? Because it's just not right. And I went to see the same gynecologist team that I had been going to since I was 18 years old. They delivered my babies. I loved them. And they put me with a PA who examined me in such a way that honestly, I left there feeling violated physically. And then I was like, I'm never going there again. Let me go find a woman doctor. Right. So I'm like, let me go find a woman doctor. And so I go to this woman doctor who, I think she's fine, but she, just like many others, immediately poo pooed any kind of HRT because I was like, this is what I think I need. Like, there's something happening in my body. I'm like, I had had enough understanding to know that I think this is what I needed. And she was like, no, 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 no. So I found myself being referred to a different wellness clinic, and I started there. And at the end of the day, I've had all the types, and I'd love for you to review them, but there's creams, right? There's creams, there's pellets, there's oral patches, there's all these. And then you touched on the synthetic versus the bioidentical, right? And so, can you explain what the difference between the two is? But before you do that, I also want to talk about way back in the day, doctors always just wanted to put me on birth control. And I have tried birth control throughout my 20s, etc., after my babies, and it just made me a raging lunatic. And I have now since understood, I don't know if that was from you or from somebody else, that was because standard birth control is synthetic. And what you guys are giving us now is the bioidentical, where that is a far more tolerated form of the hormone replacement because birth control is hormone replacement therapy too. That's just so that you don't get pregnant. Whereas hormone replacement therapy, the bioidentical kind, is in a different form. So if you could kind of comment on a couple of those things for me about what the difference between synthetic and bioidentical is.
Yes, there's a ton there. Obviously, there's lots of stuff that I want to cover. I want to start off with number one. Obviously, what you're experiencing is what's referred to as vaginal atrophy, which is a very common
Thank
symptom
you.
and side effect, mainly
It
attributable
literally
to
felt like it was caving in on itself.
yeah,
I was like, what's
yeah.
happening?
It's a lack of estrogen primarily, but I want to get to the point about. I want to talk about some formal definitions here because I think it is critically important. Excuse me, I think it's critically important for women to understand some of these terms that you hear quite frequently. And a lot of times there's lots of misconceptions or lots of
Yes.
bad information. So I want to start off with perimenopause. 43 is average age for perimenopause. About 85% of perimenopausal women will exhibit what's called vasomotor symptoms, which are referred to as hot flashes and night sweats. So the vast majority of women will experience those. Normally, what we see is some inconsistencies, the periods which you refer to. So it's broken down to your luteal phase, your follicular phase, assuming a 28-day cycle. First 14 days, the follicular phase is dominated by estrogen. The second 14 days, the luteal phase is dominated by progesterone. So every month throughout your reproductive life cycle, date of first period to date of last period, you're having estrogen and progesterone, pretty consistent messages from your ovaries and pretty consistent hormones throughout your body. At about the age of 43, on average, the ovaries start to misfire. So basically, the estrogen and progesterone that your body became very dependent upon starts to become extremely inconsistent. So you go from having very consistent hormones for a very long period of time to being very sporadic to being pretty much non-existent. So 43 is where that starts. One's average age for menopause. Important to note, the official medical definition is of menopause is 12 consecutive months of
With
no
no
period.
period.
So technically speaking, menopause is one day. The average woman spends about a third of her life in postmenopausal years. So once you go through menopause, when you lose ovarian function, you lose estrogen, you lose progesterone, you also lose a significant amount of testosterone. Believe it or not, a woman's dominant hormone is testosterone. As a woman, you make
Thank you.
significantly more testosterone than estrogen. Well, when you go through menopause, average age of 51, you lose the estrogen, your risk of all different diseases skyrocket, mainly being heart disease, specifically ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So all these risks go up substantially. As far as there being an age it's too young, that is extremely dangerous advice because there is no age it's too young. As a matter of fact, if a woman goes through menopause prior to the age of 40, that's referred to as POI. It's premature ovarian insufficiency. So if you go through menopause prior to the age of 40, you've lost many, many years of what's called endogenous estrogen, which is the estrogen that comes from your ovaries. So technically speaking, the longer your time is from first period to last period, that reproductive life cycle, the longer that is, the more protection you have for your bones, for your brain, most importantly for your
So
heart.
explain because I've heard this, but I want you to like break it down. Estrogen, I think there's a misconception that estrogen is purely a reproductive hormone. And, you hear people like yourselves talk about how it's important for brain health, heart health, etc. It was explained to me by somebody, or maybe I saw it on one of the many creators, that estrogen is the hormone that helps build tissue. It helps grow tissue. It's why it spikes when we're pregnant because we're literally growing another human. Is that also why we get the joint pain and the knee pain and the creaky and the frozen shoulder and things like that? Is that why when the estrogen declines, it's affecting all of the tissues? Because I've also noticed, and again, TMI, but that's what we're here for in Caught in the Middle. Since I've been on HRT, I don't leak as much. So there was a period of time all throughout my 40s where if I sneezed more than once, I needed a pad. And, everybody goes, oh, that's because you had babies. Well, now that I've been actually on the proper amount of estrogen, that doesn't happen anymore. I can actually jump and dance, which I couldn't do for years. And so it's like, that's because it's literally holding my bladder in place and it's not falling out anymore, which is crazy. And I think that's also because of the estrogen. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so number one, obviously what you're referring to is urinary incontinence, which many, many women struggle with that. A significant amount of women struggle with that. We actually do have some other therapies specifically for that here at LifeMed as well. It's called EPAT therapy, extracorporeal pulse activation technology. But set that aside, I think what's important, maybe I mentioned that luteal phase and the follicular phase. I think it would be important maybe to explain that a little bit deeper. So let's assume that you have a 28-day cycle. Let's say that is every single month, 28 days. The first 14 days, that follicular phase is dominated by estrogen. So It's your brain that releases a hormone called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. So day 0, you have your first day of bleeding. By about day 14 is when you ovulate, which is when estrogen drops off. Now the brain releases, the pituitary gland releases a hormone called luteinizing hormone. So the first 14 days are very estrogen heavy. Progesterone's pretty much non-existent. Day 14 on a 28-day cycle, you ovulate, estrogen goes down, the brain releases luteinizing hormone. That's what stimulates the ovaries to produce progesterone. That's what prepares the lining of your uterus for pregnancy. Well, by day 21, so first day is the day of bleeding, day 21, halfway through that second phase, the luteal phase, your body recognizes it's not pregnant. The majority of the time, recognizes it's not pregnant. When that happens, progesterone drops off of a cliff and plummets. That's what causes the shedding of the lining of your uterus, which is your period. A lot of studies will actually show women who suffer with very bad PMS symptoms that week prior to your period could actually be attributable to that significant drop in progesterone. And some low dose progesterone prescribed during that second half, the luteal phase, can actually help mitigate some of the symptoms. But it's important to note that every month throughout your reproductive life cycle, that's what's happening: estrogen, progesterone, and pretty much every receptor in your body is dependent upon the estrogen. It's a very, very important hormone. So when the ovaries start to misfire, those cells throughout your body and everything that's been so reliant upon it is now like, what is going on here? Where is it? This is what wreaks havoc on all these things. So with hormone replacement therapy specifically, the objective is to replenish, to restore to physiologic levels, and it's all about the educational piece of it. But for women, they have to understand that during that reproductive life cycle, the estrogen you're getting, and you brought up pregnancies, this shows you how important the estrogen is. So the average woman, your estrogen runs about 100 per month. When you get pregnant, it goes up to almost 3,000.
Holy cow, are you serious?
So
Holy
for
cow.
for women who've had multiple pregnancies, Alicia, on top of long reproductive life cycles, what I mean is date of first period to date of last period, about 95% of women will go through menopause by the age of 55. Any of your listeners who are 55 and over and are still getting their periods, for as big of a pain in the butt as it probably is to you, it's actually providing you that endogenous estrogen that your ovaries are making. So, and the last point I wanted to bring up too, is you'd asked this question because there was so much in there that I want
Sorry.
to make sure. No, it's good. I like it. It's
Thank
all
you.
good. I'm a Marine here though, so my brain's a little bit
I
not
know you're good.
functioning.
You're good.
So the synthetic versus the bioidentical. So
Yeah.
a lot of your listeners, you probably have heard, you and I have talked about this, I'm sure. A lot of women are familiar with Premarin, which is a synthetic form of estrogen. What a lot of women are very surprised to hear is what Premarin stands for, and this is not a joke. Premarin actually stands for pregnant mare urine. So synthetic estrogen actually comes from the pee of pregnant horses, believe it or not. And then in that study, they were also using synthetic progesterone, which is what's called MPA, or medroxyprogesterone acetate. We now have a form called bioidentical. It comes from yams primarily. It's designed to match molecule for molecule what your body makes naturally. Now, critically important to note here, a lot of people have some false sense of security thinking that, okay, synthetic hormones are bad, bioidentical are safe. Totally accurate. There's no long-term large trial that shows that the bioidentical is safer than the synthetic. We would think, we would hope, one would assume that the fact that it's more identical to what your body makes naturally, that it would be safer. But very important to note, just because bioidentical is the preferred form of administration right now does not mean that it automatically shields you from any type of risk. There most certainly are risks associated with synthetic, with bioidentical, with both of them. You mentioned the different routes of administration: creams, pills, sublinguals, injections, pellets. Every woman is very, very individual. And the route of administration for you is based off of blood panels. It's based off of your provider making recommendations. Are you predisposed to any diseases, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolisms, advanced cardiovascular disease, a family history of any type of cancers? These are all things that have to be viewed through this lens of very specific. So it's not a one size fits all. What works great for you might not work for someone else. You might need estrogen. She might need testosterone. She might need progesterone. It's very, very individualized. But to make that blanket statement, again, I'm very cautious, and I'm always very, all the TV shows, all the events I speak at, I'm very specific to state that, hey, don't have this false sense of security. You still have to look at all the risk. But what I found is, and I think you would agree with this, we always talk about risks associated with taking medication, but we don't
Mhm.
talk much about risks associated with not taking medication.
That part.
Yep, as it relates to HRT especially, all the studies show restoring estrogen to physiologic levels provides significant long-term positive health impacts.
Well, in addition to the obvious physical challenges I was having when I first started diving into this, I think one of the first things, and if the listeners have listened to another episode where I talk about how and why I created this to begin with, it actually started with a lot of anxiety. And what's interesting is, like all of us, like a lot of us Gen Xers, I've had an interesting life. And so, but I always was strong and was able to handle it. I sell real estate for a living, and stress is normal in that. You know, any life events, everything was fine. But here so this was 5 years ago. How old am I now? I'm 51, so 46. I was 46. Um, all of a sudden I'm like crying all the time. And my daughter was getting ready to go away to college, and I was like, "Oh my god, like my world is ending." And it was like I just didn't fully understand, and I think that the decline in hormones was also having a major impact on my mood, my anxiety, they talk about the rage. So there's a gazillion reasons why we need to advocate for ourselves, and that if you and you're out here listening and you're suddenly feeling anxious and angry, and you're like, "This isn't me." I see it in some of the moms groups on social media where they're like, "What is wrong with me?" And I'm like, "It's your hormones are declining." And it's exhausting to have to go through, I had the one practitioner that I felt violated with. I went to a different practitioner. I was like, "Oh, let me find a woman, right? Let me find a woman. She'll understand." And I went there, and she was young, and, unfortunately, I think she was, like, in her 30s potentially. At least she looked that way. And I felt she dismissed me too. She was like, "Oh, no," because I had already said that I was going to a wellness clinic looking to get HRT, and she was like she did not want me to do it. And I was like, "Honey, I'm doing it." Like, I'm doing it. And so I only saw her, I think, once. And I was like, "I'm never seeing you again." And so finding a doctor that fits, and ironically, my gynecologist is a older gentleman, and I drive an hour to go see the guy. But he is very pro, hormone replacement therapy, HRT. He's very, he's easy, but he's making sure, because I also have a 7 centimeter cyst on my left ovary. It's a simple cyst. It hasn't done anything, but he's watching it to make sure, because remember that estrogen will help grow things. So, they don't want that growing any larger. Can you comment on the things that aren't physical, like the mood, like the rage, like the anxiety, and how and why, again, progesterone, testosterone, how do the three, that type trifecta, really help with those things? Again, because that's also that quiet part that, we sort of suffer in silence, where we want to be active and friendly and hang out with our friends, but we're like, nah, I'm tired, or I'm in a bad mood, or any of those things. And I think that that's the hormones, and it's not actually us. I think that we're hardwired for connection, but yet in this weird space of life, we wind up really withdrawing because our bodies are just betraying us.
Well, when you look at wellness, you think about the physical aspect of it, right? There's physical, there's emotional, spiritual, social, intellectual. So often, I believe, as it relates to menopause, we attribute everything to the physical component to just say, okay, what's happening to me? Like, where are these symptoms coming? How can I mitigate these physical symptoms so I can sleep, so I can eat, so I can exercise, which is insanely important, obviously. But a whole other component that receives very little oxygen are the emotional disturbances and the strain that it puts on relationships, and how divorce rates skyrocket. And not saying obviously that every ounce of divorce rates can be tied back to menopause, but there's most certainly a component. And for women especially, what I've gathered, women are very good at just sucking it up and getting it done. And I think what happens with most ladies is they go to their doctors, they have the symptoms, they know something's not right, the diet's not working, the exercise isn't working, they're getting frustrated with their kids, getting frustrated with their husbands even more so than they normally do. They're noticing things, they can't remember stuff, they have the brain fog, they have the insomnia, they're having these vaginal issues, these sex drive issues, all the things. They know something's not right because women are very, very in tune to their bodies. They go to the person they trust the most, which is normally a GYN, and the GYN pulls blood and comes back and says, "Hey, you're in range." Part of being a woman, sorry about this, suck it up and deal with it. You walk out of the office normally with the recommendation of don't eat chocolate chip cookies, don't drink wine, take this SSRI,
What you
and
said
you
in your
leave.
book. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was put on antidepressants, and I'm like, and the thing that's crazy is, yeah, I stopped crying, but then I didn't give a shit about anything. And I was like, "This is also not me. Like, this
Yeah.
is not me at all." I mean,
And
you've
it's an
known me for 30 years. I'm like,
yeah.
I have always been like a go-getter and a get, and I'm fiercely about my family. And so like having anxiety and being put on an antidepressant and then being like just numbed from life, I was like, No, this sucks too."
And also very important to note, there most certainly is a place for FSRIs, right? So
Absolutely.
there's, 100% they have their space, whatever. But to use that as a correction for, and again, I don't say anything negatively whatsoever about doctors, GYNs, PCPs, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, RNs, MAs, LPNs, anybody in the medical community, but specifically OBGYNs. I don't say anything negative about them whatsoever because they truly do want to
Absolutely.
help. They go through this, they're in this profession for a reason, but there needs to be a much better education. Doctors, the average doctor gets 6 hours of training in medical school specifically for menopause. So, to go back to what ends up happening with most women that I talk to, again, you go back to hunkering down and dealing with it. You just suck it up and deal with it. You know what? This is the way it's supposed to be. You're totally deprived of quality of life. You have all these issues going on. You don't know why it's going on. The business community loses billions of dollars every year due menopausal ladies and symptoms they're having and the inability to go to work or maybe retiring early. And what happens a lot is women just give up. And then again, it's this total deprivation of quality of life. And if it was just a matter of educating people, then we would be able to arm ourselves. And for women, to arm yourselves with the information. So when you do have these conversations with your doctors, you're able to have a two-way conversation. Nobody at any time should ever allow their doctors to make 100% of their medical decisions for them. We should have some input. 1%, 2%, whatever it is, but it's extremely difficult for women to open up conversations with doctors if, number one, the doctor doesn't fully understand it, and then if women themselves don't understand it, and not out of not wanting to learn about it, it's just inability to find accurate fact-based information. Again, this was the whole root of me writing the book, was just to arm women with the information and say, whether or not you're a candidate for HRT is a conversation to have with your doctor. I'm not here to determine whether or not you're a candidate. What I am here to tell you is
For it.
100% one of women are owed fact-based information. In the Marine Corps, we'd say junk in, junk out. You make bad decisions on the battlefield due to bad information you're getting, things end bad. As it relates to menopause, as it relates to women's health in general, you have to be able to have fact-based information to arm yourselves with all the information. So when those questions come up, when you get the answers, you can ask questions and get deeper into it and make sure that whoever you're talking to fully understands what you're going through.
Yes. No, I mean, and that's the thing. So that actually leads me to the next thing. Like, what can, for those who are listening and they're going through it and they're like, "Oh my God, I have all that stuff going on. My head is steaming at my son's baseball game too." How do they bring it up? Like, where should they start? And in taking into consideration, right now, the cost of medical care is really skyrocketing. Insurance is also a bit of a challenge. So, like, where, someone who's listening to this that's like, "Oh, I've got all this kind of crazy stuff, like everything she's just talked about. Like, I'm doing that too." Where do they start?
It starts with education. My book, I wrote, The Menopausal Marine, I
Yes.
give
Yes.
copies away for free. So anyone, if you're in Maryland or Delaware or PA, if you want to stop in anytime, no questions asked, walk in the front door and be like, hey, give me a copy of Eric's book, The Menopausal Marine. That's one way to educate yourself. There are other books out there on menopause, great books on it.
Yes.
I like to think mine's pretty easy to read because I write in the same capacity in which I read. And again, being a former Marine, I kind of struggle with that.
It was a cute book. I loved it. It was humorous. It was great. I highly recommend it as well.
Thank you. But regardless of my book or any other book out there, for me personally, if you were to ask that question, it absolutely must start with the educational aspect of it. You have to fully arm yourself with fact-based. Be careful going on Google, be careful going around. Look at the sources where you find information. You look at studies, there's observational studies, there's randomized controlled trials. If you see a study and you look at it and it says observational study, understand that that's not information you should put a whole bunch of weight on. Observational studies are great at developing what's called a hypothesis. So in theory, when you're looking at observational data, you're taking things that are already present, right? So you go into a hospital, they take the records of 100,000 people and they observe it, hence the name observational study. With that observation, they develop a hypothesis. So the hypothesis might be women taking HRT decrease their risk of cardiovascular disease by 50%. That's now a hypothesis. Now what you do is you test that hypothesis in what's called a randomized controlled trial. That's a double blind placebo. You've all heard of these before. You have the placebo group. So basically, you take the hypothesis with the observational study, test it in a randomized controlled trial, then come to the conclusion and say, okay, yes, this was accurate. But what happens a lot of times with observational studies is you read the headline, study finds A, B, or C. Well, that study was an observational study, could have been very biased. Who funded the study, right? We hear this all the time about the pharmaceutical industry
Mhm.
conducting their own studies. Not saying that's a horrible thing. I'm not going to automatically say they're just tweaking data, but the potential is there as opposed to something like the Women's Health Initiative, randomized controlled trial. We have placebo group, we have the group that's taking medication. There's no way to really tweak that data. It is what it is, but very important when you're reading data, especially when you see study finds, do more research and see what type of study. If it's observational, make sure you're aware of that.
Thank you for commenting on that. And I wanted to go circle back to the different types of HRT for just a second, because now that HRT is less taboo and more gynecologists are like medical, they're prescribing some of the pharmaceutical HRT, which I think is back to that synthetic. And it reminds me of one of the times when I had, after my experience with the young woman doctor and the PA that violated me. I don't laugh, it wasn't fun. Anyway, I went to a urogynecologist who said, here, use this patch. Now, if you remember earlier on in our chat, I said that birth control and I never really got along. And excuse me, I tried a number of different kinds and it always just made me just not, I was just not functioning. It wasn't good. And so they give me this patch and I started using the patch. And about 3 weeks into it, I plummeted into probably the worst depression I had ever experienced. And I didn't put two and two together until I was going to the refrigerator to replace my patch. And I was like, because it was something that I had, I mean, it was worse than the anxiety that I had before I'd started. It was worse than anything else. I literally kind of wanted to jump off a cliff. Like it was not good. And so I went to go switch the patch and I was like, I wonder if it's this. And so I stopped and I didn't use it anymore. And so then when I went down the road of the bioidentical hormones, I was very anxious, different kind of anxious. I was situationally anxious that, okay, is this going to do the same thing to me? And again, I think that just like you said, women are so in tune to our bodies. I'm very, very, very body aware of my own self. So being able to put that together was one of them. And so I just want to talk about the different kinds, right? So you've got oral, right? So I had started with a different functional wellness company that started me on creams because I was so worried about that whole thing. And I was like, and they were like, well, we'll try the creams. And I was like, okay, fine. So I tried creams. And then after, they got my levels up, I was still, it was very wonky for a while. And I think that's important for everybody listening who is thinking about trying hormone. It does not happen immediately. It is a lot of trial and error. It is based on your labs. Again, this is not medical advice. Please make sure that you are advocating for yourself. But the thing is, be in tuned and pay attention to what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And so they started with the creams and then they were like, hey, and I was telling them, I'm like, I'm not always great at like remembering to put it on every day. And so they were like, try the pellets. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, what is that? And so they explain it, and I'm going to explain it. You can clean it up if you want, but they literally they put a slice into your like rump and like above your butt. And they insert these little like rice things that then release the hormone over a period of time. I was told that that they would last, how long do they last? Like 3 months, 4 months, something along those
Normally
lines.
3 months. Yeah.
I think I burned through mine very, very quickly. And so within about a week or two, my levels went up and through the roof. And for the first time ever, I actually understood what it was to have a libido, but it was out of control. It was like I was a 17-year-old boy. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is what my husband has been talking about. And I'm like, but I was still kind of like, this is too much. Like it's too much. And I did 2 rounds of pellets. And it was like a roller coaster of emotions and physical. And, it was like, I could feel when it was like they were like dropping off a cliff. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, I can't live like this. I'd rather just go back to the pellets. I mean, go back to the creams. And that's actually when I called you because I had seen you on social, we've been friends forever. And I was like, okay, what does he know? And so that's when you said, come into Life Med and, talk to my people. And so I did. And then she was the one who switched me to an oral estrogen. And again, because of my birth control experience, I was anxious again. And I was like, but birth control and I, like, oral estrogen's just not been my thing. It's just like, just try it, if you pay attention. And so that, and I'm sharing this story because it has been years of me trial and error and trying to find the right balance, what works for me. And, you said it earlier, every single woman is different. Not everybody is a candidate. Depending on where you go, I highly recommend Life Med, but wherever you go, you're going to get potentially a different suggestion. And so I know that was, again, a lot of information, but I want you to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so this all goes back to, again, different routes of administration, every woman being very, very different, how you metabolize, prior medical history, the severity of symptoms, long-term health risk. There's so many components to it. The follow-up blood is a very important component to this. And like with us internally, when our patients start on any hormone therapy, 6 weeks later, they're coming back out to review the blood. Because it's not just about looking at a number, it's also looking about how you feel. Another thing I wanted to bring up, Alicia, because I know we probably have a whole ton of time. I do want to bring up a very important topic that for a lot of ladies who've had hysterectomies, I think this is a really important thing to point out because there is tons of misinformation floating about that. So just very high level, obviously you have a hysterectomy where uterus is removed, you keep both your ovaries. That's really the optimal of all of the different types of hysterectomies. But then there's one where you have the ovaries, both your ovaries and your uterus removed. That's called a bilateral oophorectomy. So for women who are still in their childbearing years during that normal reproductive life cycle, when you have a hysterectomy where the ovaries are removed, it's instantaneous overnight menopause. You get thrusted into it because you remove the ovaries, you lose all the hormones. It is so insanely important for women to understand the risk associated with that. Obviously, you have to trust your doctor to give you the best medical advice in terms of can you keep the ovaries, should they be removed? But for women who have had hysterectomies where the ovaries are removed, it is really, really important for them to understand and be educated on replenishing those hormones with HRT, especially when women go through and have hysterectomies and they're very young. Remember, 51 is average age for a woman to go through menopause naturally. By the age of 65, a woman's risk of cardiovascular disease actually increases more so than for a man. So as a woman, you have about a 10-year heart protection over men up to the age of 65. So if you're a 30-year-old woman, harm a 20-year-old man. 40-year-old woman, harm a 30-year-old man. When you get to the age of 65, that now flips. You become more susceptible to ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Thought process there, 51 average age menopause, you lose ovarian function, you lose estrogen. Those 14 years of lack of estrogen translates into heart disease. I bring
Wow.
this up because that's for an average woman of 51 years old. When you have a woman who's in her 30s or early 40s and has a bilateral oophorectomy and loses ovarian function, there's potentially 10 to 15 years of lost endogenous estrogen, which could translate into elevated risk for heart disease, bone disease. We didn't talk about that. Osteoporosis is such a deadly disease. 65 and over, you fall and have a hip fracture, you need surgery. 30% chance you do not survive 1 year following surgery. Neurodegenerative disease, two-thirds of Alzheimer's patients are women. Could it be the abrupt loss of estrogen that wreaks havoc on the brain? It's called white matter hyperintensities, cerebral small vessel disease. These are all things that you have to educate on, but it goes back to me wanting to point out for women with hysterectomies, it is very, very, very important that you are thoroughly educated on replenishing those hormones if you have to have the ovaries removed, because again, it can really wreak havoc if you lose decades of estrogen protection.
Wow. Wow. That's wild. And it's wild that we've just sort of been ignored. Here's one of my last questions. So, obviously, the goal of this conversation, of this podcast, is to talk about the things that aren't really talked about. And so, you being the Marine, the boy that you are, how can we help our male spouses when we're going through this? I know that one of the things, and I've been married for 25 years, we've been together for 29 years, like, but he'll even go, well, you're in a mood. And I'm like, how can we get our men to really truly empathize and understand what's happening. And I want this to come from a man because I feel like they'll, bros like bros, and they'll hear it from you.
I think what's important, Alicia, is for men especially to recognize that what women go through and what men go through are totally different. I did a TV show a couple months ago, and they put me on talking about my book, and I've been on the show tons of times. They put me on air with a male host, which right off the bat I didn't quite understand why, but I was fine with it. It's okay. So we start the interview, and he's like, "Eric, congratulations on the book, blah blah." He's like, can we talk about this? You're gonna be talking about menopause, but can we also just talk about the fact that men go through the same thing that women go through? And I lost my cool. We were live on air, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, time out. I'm like, this is silly, and this is where I think it all starts. Is first helping to educate men on them understanding what you go through when you lose hormones compared to what we go through is not the same thing. For men, it's very gradual. We do lose testosterone as we age, month by month, year by year. Our testosterone levels do decline. That part is accurate. So eventually, we get to a point where we have a fraction of the same androgens we did during our normal years. But to say that that's the same thing women go through, again, it goes from being extremely consistent for a very long period of time to being crazy sporadic to being non-existent. That change, that shift translates into severe symptoms, that translates into severe mental and all these different issues. So I think for guys, what they have to understand is ladies in your life, the women who are in your life right now, they most likely have no idea what's happening either. However frustrated you are, and I have this conversation all the time because I talk with ladies, and I do love helping men out as well with men's health. I love helping guys out, testosterone replacement therapies, cardiovascular health, prostate-specific antigen, neurodegenerative disease, bone disease, all this kind of stuff. But when I have these conversations with the ladies, a lot of times I'll say, hey, if your husband wants to call, like have him give me a ring. Like I love to talk with them. And the conversation goes all the time. I've wrote about this in the book. I joke about it, but the husbands will call and I'll be like, hey, Jim, on a scale of 1 to 10, how frustrated are you with your wife? Like 1 is you're not frustrated at all. 10 is you're very frustrated. And almost every time they'll
They're
be like,
10.
I'm at a 10.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, let me help you out here. I can tell you, because I've been talking with Alicia for a while now, your frustration level is at a 10. Hers is 192. So how about you just chill out, relax? No, she's not cheating on you. The fact she doesn't want to have sex every day of the week is because her body is totally shifting. She's lost hormones. It hurts for her physically. It's the last thing she's thinking about. She's trying to get 3 hours straight of sleep. She's trying to get rid of all the weight redistribution in the mid region. She's trying to focus on going to the gym and gaining and not gaining 3 pounds, but losing a pound. Just work with us here. Let's figure out together what collectively is happening. But there does need to be some form of their willingness to want to learn. And sadly, I do have some men that I meet with, that I talk with, and they just don't. They have no desire to really understand. They're convinced that their wives just don't want to be with them anymore, and all this kind of stuff. So the educational piece is critically important for women. It's critically important for men. It's critically important for doctors. It's important for children, for neighbors, for coworkers. Everything, regardless of male or female, young or old, spouse or coworker, it all originates with education, and you have to be very, very good at doing research so you can get answers.
Well, hopefully this can be a launching point for them to start their research. Go get Eric's book, The Menopause Marine. What did you call it again? Universal Medical. What was it?
It's the only menopause, the only universal female medical experience.
Universal Female Medical Experience. And you know what? Here's the thing. Eric is my buddy. I've known him forever. What do you call me? What's my name?
Alisea.
Alisea. Alisea. I've got one of these names. It is not my name. That's my name. That is just Eric's name for me. I am Alicia, but he's called me Alisea since we've met. And, if you guys want to write in or have some questions, maybe we can have him back. I'd like to actually have him back. He's got an incredible tool at LifeMed that's doing DNA testing and the blueprint for your body. And we're going to do another episode with that. So I'm excited to have you back for that. So Eric, you're always the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisea. I appreciate you having me.
Eric.